The war was over, and the humans had lost everything. Ships were gone, cities burned, and soldiers turned into smoke and dust. Only one human remained alive. His name was Mark Rowan, and he was a lieutenant from Earth, captured during the final battle on the ice planet Korvac. He was now just another prisoner of the Zerati Empire. The Zerati were tall, strong, and brutal. They had dark armor and glowing eyes. Their empress was feared across the stars. Her name was Ashara, and they called her the War Empress. She never lost a battle and never left survivors. Except for one. Except for Mark. They brought him to Lyra X, a world of blood and screams. The skies were red and the ground was cracked like old bones. At the center stood a giant arena made of black stone. The walls were high and the doors closed with a heavy sound. Mark stood inside the arena, wearing only chains and scars. Around him were other prisoners from other worlds. Aliens with wings, claws, teeth, and eyes that held no hope. A voice spoke through the speakers, cold and sharp like ice. Welcome to the blood arena of Lyra X. Today you fight for her. Today you fight for glory or death. There's no escape. The gates opened and weapons dropped from the ceiling. Mark grabbed a metal rod, while others rushed to take blades and axes. The crowd above roared, the sound shaking the ground. And then the battle began. It was chaos. Screams filled the air as bodies fell. Some fought like beasts, others begged for mercy. Mark did neither. He moved fast, using his speed to avoid the larger fighters. He ducked under a swing and knocked an alien to the ground. He rolled behind another and struck with the rod. He didn't kill. He only hit hard enough to stop them. High above in a glass chamber, the War Empress watched. Her eyes were fixed on Mark. She leaned forward, her face hidden behind a golden mask. Her guards stood around her, silent and still. But she was interested. Very interested. Mark felt her eyes. He looked up just once and saw her watching. Something changed in that moment. The fight ended with 3 survivors. One with broken wings. One with fire on his skin. And Mark covered in blood that wasn't his. Guards entered and dragged the other 2 away. Mark stood alone, waiting for the same. But no guards came. Instead, a figure in dark robes appeared. He walked to Mark slowly, holding a glowing crystal. The crowd fell silent. The figure spoke. You have been seen. You have been chosen. Mark said nothing. He was tired, hungry, and angry. But he did not speak. The robed figure continued. You are to be brought before the Empress. She wishes to see you with her own eyes. The other prisoners gasped. This was not a reward. It was a sentence. They had all heard the stories. Every year the War Empress chose a few from the arena. She called it a ritual, a tradition of the old Zerati ways. They said it was mating, but it always ended in death. All who entered her chamber never returned. Mark was led through dark tunnels. His chains now gone, but he was not free. Guards walked behind him with electric spears. He passed doors filled with screams and rooms filled with bones. He did not ask questions. He only walked. Finally, they reached a large gate made of black glass. It opened slowly with a hiss, and beyond it was a golden chamber lit by blue fire. The Empress sat on a throne made of weapons. Her armor shimmered like the sun on water. Her hair flowed like smoke, and her eyes burned like stars. She looked at him like he was a puzzle, a challenge, or maybe something more. Mark stood tall. He would not kneel. The Empress rose from her throne. She walked to him slowly, like a lion before the kill. She was taller than him, stronger than him, and more dangerous than anyone he had ever seen. She spoke with a voice that was soft but sharp. You are not like the others. You fight with your mind, not just your body. You did not kill today. Mark answered with calm words. I fight to survive, not to please you. The guards raised their spears, but she lifted her hand. Silence. She smiled. You may survive my ritual. If you do, you will be the first human to do so. She stepped closer and whispered a single word. Run. The floor opened beneath Mark. He fell into darkness, into a new trial, into the real beginning. And high above, the War Empress laughed. Mark hit the ground hard, but rolled with the fall, his body aching from the arena and from the sudden drop, the air was thick and warm like breath trapped in a box, and the walls glowed with a strange red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. He stood slowly and looked around, finding himself in a long corridor made of black stone with markings that moved like liquid. He had no weapon and no idea where he was, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary prison. This was part of the ritual. Footsteps echoed behind him, but when he turned, no one was there. Then the floor moved. The stones under his feet shifted, forming steps that led forward. A voice whispered from the walls, soft like wind and sharp like broken glass. "You run or you die. You choose." Mark ran. The hallway stretched longer and longer until it opened into a vast underground arena, not the same one as before. This one had no crowd, no cheers, no light from above. Only silence. And 10 other beings standing across from him. They were not like the fighters from earlier. These were stronger, faster, and more prepared. Some had armor. Some had claws. One had no face. And all had survived something worse than death. A screen flickered above them, and the Empress appeared again, her face shadowed, but her eyes bright like fire. "You have entered my maze. Each of you has been chosen. Only one will leave. Impress me." The screen vanished, and the ground shook. Walls rose from every side, splitting the group apart. Mark was alone again. The maze had begun. He moved fast. He knew the rules of survival. Stay quiet. Stay low. Use everything. The first corner brought a trap. A spinning blade shot from a wall. He ducked just in time and rolled forward, landing in a puddle of thick green liquid. It hissed as it touched his skin, but he wiped it off and kept moving. He heard a scream. Someone had failed. Then another. And another. Mark kept running. He found stairs. He climbed. He found fire. He crawled. He found silence. He stopped. In one chamber he saw something strange. A mirror that showed not his reflection but memories. His old squad. His last battle. The moment he was captured. He looked away and moved on. The maze tested not just the body but the mind. Fear. Guilt. Hope. He faced them all. But never stopped. Then he heard breathing. Not his own. Another was near. He turned a corner and came face to face with a tall alien with silver skin and yellow eyes. The creature looked at him with surprise and lowered its blade. "You are human," it said in a rough voice. "You are not supposed to be here." Mark replied, "I could say the same." They stood still. Neither attacked. The alien finally spoke again. "My name is Drex. I am from the world of Kun. I have been in this maze for 5 cycles." Mark was shocked. 5 cycles. That meant 5 trials. 5 chances to die. "Why are you still alive?" Mark asked. "Because I learned not to fight the maze, but to read it." Drex explained that the maze was alive. It changed. It learned. It watched. And it favored those who gave it something new. Mark listened. He knew Drex spoke the truth. This place was not just about killing. It was about watching how they survived. Together they moved forward. They avoided the traps. They shared food. They watched each other's backs. But both knew the truth. Only one would leave. After 2 more chambers, they found the exit. A tall door with a glowing Zerati symbol. It opened slowly. Only one could step through. Drex looked at Mark and nodded. "You are different from the others. You think first. You fight last. You may change her." Mark said nothing, but held Drex's arm in respect. Then he stepped through the door. The maze vanished behind him. He now stood in a large room filled with golden light and strange blue plants that swayed without wind. The floor was soft and warm. The walls hummed with energy. And at the center stood the Empress. She was no longer in armor. She wore a flowing robe of black silk. Her eyes still burned, but her face was calm. "You surprised me again," she said. "Most beg, most scream, most die. You did not. You adapted. You made an ally. You made a choice." Mark said, "I didn't come here to impress you." She smiled slightly. "And yet, you did." She walked around him slowly, her footsteps silent, her gaze heavy. "You are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most dangerous, but you are the most human, and that is rare." She reached out and touched his chest. "Do you feel fear?" "Yes," he said. "Good. So do I." She turned and walked to a platform that rose from the floor. A table stood at its center. Upon it lay a small blade made of crystal. "This is the final part of the ritual," she said. "One cut, one drop of blood. If you survive, you will not be my slave, not my toy, but something else, something more." She held the blade out to him. Mark looked at it, then at her. "What happens if I refuse?" "You die," she said simply. "But not here. Back in the arena, before the crowd, as a lesson to others who waste my time." Mark took the blade. He made the cut across his palm. Blood dripped, red and alive. The Empress stepped forward and took his hand. She pressed her own palm against his. Their blood mixed, and the room flashed with energy. "It is done," she said. "Now, you belong to me, but not as you think." Mark felt something change inside. A connection, a link. He saw images, visions, memories that were not his. He saw her past, her rise to power, her pain, her loneliness. And then, he saw himself, through her eyes, not as a weak human, but as something new, something important. She let go of his hand and stepped back. "You are the first human to survive my ritual. You are not my mate, not yet, but you are the first who might be." Mark stood in silence, and far away in the shadows of the chamber, the guards watched, and they were afraid. Mark stood still as the light faded from the ritual. His hand still burned from the cut, and the blood that had mixed with hers was now gone, absorbed into something ancient and alive. The Empress turned away and walked toward a curtain of black silk that opened without a sound, revealing a second chamber even larger and more strange than the last. Without a word, she looked back and nodded once, then vanished into the shadows beyond the curtain. Mark followed. The room was unlike anything he had seen in all his years as a soldier. It did not look like a throne room or a war chamber. It looked like a memory. The walls pulsed with colors that changed with his breath. The floor shimmered with soft golden light, and the ceiling was covered with floating crystals that sang without sound. This was her true space, a place no other prisoner had ever seen and lived. He felt the silence press against him, not heavy, but deep. Every step echoed in ways that made him feel like the walls were listening. The Empress stood at the far end near a round table carved from a single piece of white stone. Her armor was gone, replaced by a flowing robe made from light itself. She no longer looked like a warlord. She looked like a legend. "You are not dead," she said, and her voice had changed. It was still powerful, but now it held something else. Something old. Something tired. Mark stopped near the table, unsure if he was meant to sit or stand. She motioned to a chair. He sat slowly, watching her every move. "Do you know why I brought you here?" she asked. "Because I survived," he replied. "No. Many survived the first day. Some survived the maze. But you changed it." Mark stayed silent. The Empress walked to a tall glass panel that showed the stars beyond the palace walls. "You are the first human to enter this chamber, and perhaps the first to understand what it means to survive, not by killing, but by choosing not to." She looked at him over her shoulder. "My people believe in strength above all, in battle, in domination, even in love. To them, this ritual is about proving power, about taking control. But it was not always so. Long ago it was about balance, about finding a mind that could match mine, a soul that would not bend nor break, but stand beside me." She walked back to the table and placed a small object in front of him. It was a stone, dark and smooth. It pulsed with warmth. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Mark shook his head. "It is a memory, sealed by one of the last truth-seers of my kind. Inside it is the story of the first Empress, the one who did not rule through fear, but through unity." Mark touched the stone, and his vision flashed. He saw a planet burning. He saw people crying. He saw one woman rise with a sword in one hand and an open palm in the other. He pulled away, breathing hard. The Empress watched him. "You saw her. She was my ancestor, and her power lives in all of us who wear the crown. But over time that power twisted. What was once a bond became a contest. And now I am feared, not loved, obeyed but never trusted. Mark said softly, "Why me?" "Because you saw the maze, and you did not just survive it. You read it. You found another and chose not to kill him. You knew the rules and still broke them. That is the kind of mind I need." Mark looked at her. "Then what now?" "Now you will stay. And learn." The Empress walked to another wall, and it opened like liquid. Behind it was a room filled with moving symbols floating in the air. They danced and formed shapes that meant nothing to him. This is the Chamber of Balance. Every Empress must enter it with her chosen. Not a mate, not a slave, a reflection. You must survive one more trial. One I cannot help you with. One that takes place not in blood, but in mind. She stepped aside. "Enter, and face it." Mark stood and walked toward the chamber. As he stepped inside, the air thickened. The room spun. He was no longer in the palace. He was in a desert. Alone. Heat beat down on him, and sand stung his face. He turned in every direction, but saw nothing but endless dunes. Then, he saw someone in the distance. It was himself, but older, worn, tired. The other Mark spoke. "You think you're ready, but you are not. You think this is about saving your life, but it's not. It's about saving hers." Mark stared at the vision. "Why do you look like me?" "Because I am the part of you that you hide. The fear, the anger, the weakness. You cannot lead if you still carry me." Then the vision attacked. Mark fought himself in the burning sand, blow for blow, strike for strike. But the vision knew every move. Because it was him. Mark fell to the ground, bleeding, weak. The vision stood over him and raised its hand for the final blow. But Mark did not fight back. Instead, he opened his arms. "I accept you," he said. "I accept my fear, my anger, my past." The vision froze. Then it smiled and vanished. The desert faded. Mark was back in the Chamber of Balance. The Empress stood there watching him. "You passed," she said. "You accepted yourself. Most try to destroy what they hate inside. You embraced it. That is the difference between a warrior and a ruler." She walked to him and placed her hand on his chest. "You are not my slave. You are not my consort. You are my equal, if you choose to be." Mark looked into her eyes and saw not just fire, but sadness, hope, and something more. He nodded. "Then I stay." And in that moment, the Chamber of Balance lit up with light. Old magic woke, and for the first time in many cycles, the Empress smiled. The light faded slowly, and the Empress turned her back and walked through a door that opened without sound or command. Mark followed her with steady steps, though his body still trembled from the visions he had faced in the Chamber of Balance. The palace around him pulsed like a living creature, the walls breathing, the floor humming, and the air filled with a soft song only half heard. Every step forward took him deeper into the heart of the Empress's world, and he knew now that survival was not just a fight for life, but a test of soul. They came to a wide hall lined with statues of beings unlike any he had seen before. Each statue was carved from crystal, each one different, and each face locked in pain or fear or triumph. The Empress stopped before the largest one. "This is the original Maze Guardian," she said. "The first to survive, the first to be broken, the first to be rebuilt." Mark looked up at the statue and saw that the face was partly human, not fully but close. The eyes were deep and hollow, and the mouth open in a silent scream that never ended. He asked, "Why does the maze exist?" The Empress spoke with a voice like wind through ice. "Long before the wars, long before the thrones, my people believed that only those who faced themselves and survived should lead or shape the future. The maze was made not by us, but by those who ruled before. It changes, it thinks, it remembers, and it does not forgive. You will walk it, not to prove yourself to me, but to prove yourself to it." Mark asked, "What happens if I fail?" "Then the maze keeps you. Forever." He said nothing more and followed her through the last door. The maze entrance stood like a mouth ready to swallow him. Made of black stone, and glowing veins of violet light, it pulsed with slow rhythm, like it was waiting, like it was hungry. The Empress handed him a small silver disc, no larger than a coin. This will not save you, but it may help you understand. He took it without question and walked inside. The door sealed behind him without a sound. Darkness, then light. The maze came to life. Walls rose around him, moving with each step. The floor shifted directions. Ceilings stretched and narrowed like a breathing lung. Everything changed constantly. There was no map, no guide, no pattern. He moved slowly, one hand on the wall, one ear tuned for sounds. Suddenly, a bright shape flashed across the corridor. It was not human, not alien, just motion. He chased it. The maze responded. The walls melted, then reformed. The air thickened. The light vanished. He was in a chamber of mirrors, each one showing a different version of him. One angry, one broken, one afraid, one laughing. He stared at them. They stared back. Then all at once they shattered. The pieces did not fall. They floated around him, reflecting his every movement from 1,000 angles. Then a voice spoke. "Why do you walk here alone?" Mark turned but saw no one. "Why do you follow the Empress? Why do you think you are different? Why do you still hope?" The voice became many, whispers in his ear, questions from inside. He placed the silver disc against his chest and closed his eyes. "I walk because I must. I follow because I choose. I am different because I learn. And I hope because it is the only thing left." The voices fell silent. The mirrors turned black, and the floor opened beneath him. He dropped into water, cold and dark. It pulled him under, but he swam toward the light. He broke the surface into a garden, plants that breathed, roots that moved, leaves that whispered. In the center was a stone bench, and on it sat someone. It was Drex, but not the Drex from the maze. This one was older, tired, wounded. Drex looked at him with hollow eyes. "Why did you leave me?" Mark sat beside him and said, "I did not leave. You chose to stay." Drex nodded. "That is true. But now you must carry more than your own weight. You carry mine. You carry hers. You carry theirs." Mark stood and turned. The garden faded. He was now walking through a library. Books floated in the air and pages turned on their own. Words written in hundreds of alien scripts glowed softly as he passed. One book floated toward him and opened. Inside he saw pictures, not drawings, memories. His home, his mother's face, his commander shouting orders, his friends laughing before the last battle. The pages turned faster. He reached out to stop them, but the book burned away in his hands. Then the maze spoke again. "You still carry sorrow. You still carry guilt. You cannot protect all. You cannot save all." He answered, "I know." Then the maze asked, "Will you still try?" Mark said yes. The books vanished. The room melted. He was now in a narrow tunnel. Fire on both sides. Heat so strong it burned his breath. He ran, not to escape, but toward something. The tunnel opened into the final chamber. A single platform stood at the center. Above it hovered a glowing orb made of light and shadow. It pulsed like a living heart, and surrounding it were the shapes of every being he had met. The Empress, Drex, his old squad, the reflections, the voices. Each one looked at him. Each one waited. Mark stepped onto the platform and touched the orb. A shock ran through him. Every thought, every memory, every feeling, panic, love, anger, peace, they all rushed through him like a storm made of stars. He saw the Empress again, alone in a hall of fire, her people bowing, but never knowing her. He saw Drex standing before his own people, shunned for his mercy. He saw himself, standing at the edge of a great war, not holding a weapon, but holding a choice. He whispered into the light, "I understand." The orb dimmed, then shattered into dust. The chamber opened, and he stepped out of the maze. Mark stepped out of the maze with slow steps, his legs shaking, his eyes wide with things he had seen but could not speak, and his chest heavy with truths that no soldier had ever been trained to carry. The Empress was there waiting for him, standing at the edge of the maze chamber, her hands behind her back, and her face calm, but her eyes glowing with something more than fire. She did not speak right away, and neither did he. They stood in silence as the walls of the maze closed behind him, sealing off the storm he had survived. Then finally she turned and walked down a silver path that rose from the floor with each step, and Mark followed without question. This time there were no guards, no floating screens, no sharp voices in the shadows. Only her. Only him. They came to a wide chamber shaped like a circle with no ceiling, and the sky of Lyra X wide above them, a sea of stars, hanging like memories over ancient stone. The floor was carved with symbols older than the Empire itself, symbols that pulsed with soft, white light, each step echoing through time itself. She turned to face him and finally spoke. You are not like the others. That you already know. But what you do not know is why I let you live. Why I brought you here. Why I gave you the blade and the test and the maze. Mark said nothing. He waited. The Empress lifted her hand and pointed toward the center of the chamber, where a strange object hovered in the air. It looked like a throne, but was made of bone and crystal and fire. It spun slowly, glowing with power and pain and history. This is the true seat of power in the Zerati Empire. Not the throne of war, not the chair of command, but the heart of the trial seat. Only one who completes the ritual may sit upon it. But few have ever done so, and none without scars that never heal. Mark asked, what happens if I sit? She answered, you will see. He walked to the throne slowly, each step harder than the last. The air thickened. The light grew cold. The stars flickered. He reached the throne and placed his hand upon it. The world shifted. In a blink, he was no longer on Lyra X. He was standing on a battlefield filled with fire and smoke. Alien soldiers charged across broken ground. Human ships fell from the sky. Screams and roars filled the air. He saw himself running, dragging a wounded comrade, shooting at shapes in the dark, falling into the snow. Then the vision changed. He saw the Empress not in golden armor, but in rags, running through burning cities, her people turning on one another, a child crying, a sister dying, her hands covered in ash, and her heart full of rage. Then another vision, a throne room, a line of prisoners, one chosen each year, none returning. Then silence. He was back in the chamber. The Empress stood before him, her voice softer now. Do you understand? Mark nodded. It was never about choosing a mate. It was about choosing someone who could carry the weight you cannot, someone to share the burden, someone who sees the Empire not as it is, but as it could be. She stepped closer. The ritual was once pure, but over centuries it became twisted. What was meant to heal became a weapon. What was meant to unite became a curse. Each year I chose a warrior not to kill, but to find one who would understand. But none did. Until you. Mark looked at the throne again. It pulsed with light, like it was waiting for him. He said, what happens now? Now, she said, you decide. Do you take this role? Do you become the first human, not just to survive, but to lead? Not through blood, not through fear, but through truth. Mark stepped forward and sat on the throne. A wave of energy washed over him. He saw the Empire, not just the cities and ships, but the people, their pain, their hunger, their hopes. He saw the broken systems, the cruelty, the greed, and he saw her, the Empress alone on her golden throne, loved by none, feared by all. He saw the path ahead, not easy, not clean, but real. He rose from the throne and turned to her. I will help you, but not as a servant, not as a mate, not as a symbol, as an equal. Her eyes glowed brighter, and for the first time they softened. Then it is done. The chamber shook gently, and the sky above rippled. A new signal sent. A new path opened. From this moment forward, she said, you are no longer a prisoner of war. You are no longer a subject of trial. You are my cohort. Mark asked, what does that mean? She replied, it means your victories will be mine. Your failures will be mine. Your future will shape our future. You will eat with me, speak for me, stand with me, and if one day I fall, you will rise in my place. He looked up at the stars. Then we begin now. She nodded. They walked from the chamber side by side, not ruler and captive, but two leaders bound by blood, challenge, and truth. Far above them the stars watched. Far below, the palace shifted, and across the empire a silent wind carried the news. The ritual had changed, and the Empress was no longer alone. The stars burned brighter than before, as if they too felt the change that had taken place beneath them. Mark stood in the great hall of fire, the same place where ancient rulers once swore oaths and spilled blood to hold their place among the stars. He stood alone, facing the far end of the hall, where the Empress waited, her robes gone, her armor returned, her hands empty, but her eyes full of something sharper than any blade. She spoke with no anger, but her words struck like thunder. You asked to be my equal. You stood before the throne. You took the oath. But one test remains. Mark did not flinch. He looked at her with steady eyes. He had seen death. He had seen sorrow. He had survived the maze. He had touched the throne of memory. But now, he would face the Empress herself. She moved toward him slowly, her steps echoing through the endless chamber. Guards stood high above them on stone balconies, but none dared speak. No one had ever witnessed this moment. No one had ever been allowed this far. The Empress stopped 10 steps away and opened her hand. A weapon rose from the floor between them. Not metal, not crystal, but something living, something ancient. A blade grown from the roots of a dying world. It pulsed with red light. It hung in the air, waiting for a hand to claim it. She looked at him and said this blade was used once before, to end a war that could not be ended, to silence a god that could not be silenced. It chooses its wielder, and it tests the heart of the one who holds it. Mark stepped forward and took the blade. The moment his fingers touched it, a fire surged through his mind. Visions, 1,000 wars, 1,000 cries, 1,000 choices made in moments of pain. He held the blade in both hands. He breathed deeply. I am ready. She nodded. Then we begin. She called her weapon from the air. It formed from light. A long spear with a silver edge and a black shaft wrapped in memory threads. She moved first, fast like lightning, a blur of motion. Mark ducked under the first strike and rolled across the floor. He did not attack. Not yet. She came again, each move sharp and precise. She was not holding back, not testing, not pretending. She was fighting, truly fighting. Mark blocked the next strike and countered. He used the energy of the blade not to destroy, but to redirect. The force of each blow shook the ground. The chamber walls shimmered with ancient shields awakening from sleep. Above them the guards began to chant, not in fear, not in rage, but in awe. For the first time they saw someone match the Empress, not in strength, but in spirit. The fight lasted for minutes that felt like hours. Each wound earned, each breath heavy. Mark felt the blade pulling at his soul. It wanted more. It wanted blood, but he did not give in. Then came the final moment. She struck high. He blocked. She turned. He moved. Their blades clashed again and again, and then he found an opening. He stepped forward, his blade at her throat. She did not move. He could end it. Right there. She waited, breathing slowly, watching him. Mark lowered the blade. I will not kill for power. I will not rule through fear. If I must take the throne, I will do so without blood. She smiled, blood dripping from her lip. Then you are the one. She dropped her weapon, fell to her knees, and placed her hand over her heart. The hall fell silent. She said to all who watched from above, this human has faced the test. He has faced me, and he has not broken. He is not my servant. He is not my consort. He is not my enemy. He is my mirror. Mark stood with the blade lowered. He did not raise a fist. He did not roar with victory. He simply stood, and that silence spoke louder than any cheer. The Empress rose again and took his hand. Together they walked to the center of the hall, where the lights above began to shift. Colors danced across the walls. Symbols awakened from slumber. The bond was sealed. She turned to him and spoke in a voice only he could hear. If I ever fall, this world will need someone to carry more than just my name. You will carry the truth. Mark answered, I already do. She smiled again, a real smile, the first he had seen. The doors of the great hall opened, and the galaxy changed. Across the stars, ships turned their eyes toward Lyra X. Allies and enemies alike felt the ripple. Something had shifted. A new order had begun, and at its center stood a human with no crown, no title, no army, just a blade that chose him, and a choice he made, not to conquer, not to kneel, but to stand. The galaxy had changed. Lyra X was no longer a planet of blood and trials, but a symbol of something new, something wild and impossible. Mark stood beside the Empress, not as a prisoner, not as a champion, not as a lover, but as something more, something that could not be defined by words spoken in battle. He looked over the silver balcony of the Starhold Tower. Below him, hundreds of alien ships circled the planet, their engines silent, their weapons powered down. They waited, not for orders, but for direction. Behind him, the Empress approached with quiet steps, her golden armor glinting in the starlight. She no longer wore the crown of war. She wore no crown at all. She spoke in a voice only he could hear. The Council demands to see you. They do not believe a human can lead. They do not believe a human can survive the ritual without being broken. Mark turned to face her. Then let them see me. The chamber doors opened with a deep breath of air. Inside, the great council of stars gathered in a circle of black stone, each leader from a different world, each face shaped by different skies. Some had no eyes. Some had too many. Some floated above the floor. Others slithered or stood on spiked legs. But all were silent when the human entered. Mark walked with steady steps, his wounds still fresh, his heart still heavy. He stood in the center of the circle. They looked at him. They whispered to one another in ancient tongues. Then the Empress stepped beside him and raised one hand. This is the one who passed the Blade of Roots. This is the one who faced the Hall of Fire. This is the one who touched the throne and walked away unchanged. This is the one I chose, not because he was strong, but because he was true. A voice from the shadows called out. He is human. He is fragile. He is mortal. He does not understand what it means to lead a galaxy held together by fear and flame. Mark looked toward the voice and stepped forward. I do not come to rule. I come to break what needs breaking and rebuild what deserves to rise. I do not speak in riddles or ancient codes. I speak in truth. I have seen the empires fall. I have seen children starve. I have seen warriors forget why they fight. If that is leadership, then I will not lead. But if leadership means standing where no one else will, then I already have. The chamber fell quiet, not because his words were perfect, but because they were real. Then the Empress took his hand and held it high. From this day forward, we no longer follow tradition that feeds on pain. We no longer choose leaders through fire and blood. We choose through vision and will. He is not a king. He is not a god. He is starborn. The council remained silent for one long moment. Then one by one they rose. Some bowed. Some tilted their heads. Some offered light from their palms. And one by one they left. But none challenged. The Empress turned to Mark and whispered, We did not want a throne today. We want a beginning. Outside the chamber, the world was already changing. The people of Lyra X had heard. The planets beyond the reach of the core had seen the signals. Messages raced across the stars faster than any ship. A human now stood at the edge of the Zerati Empire, not as a captive, not as a pet, not as a ghost of a broken war, but as something new. Weeks passed. The blood arenas were closed. The breeding trials were stopped. The maze was sealed forever. The Blade of Roots was placed in a chamber of memory, never again to be used for pain. Mark spent his days among the people, not in palaces, not behind shields, but walking the markets, sitting with old soldiers, listening to stories spoken in strange tongues. They called him many names: Blade Brother, Fire Walker, Maze Heart, but none of those stayed. Only one name echoed across the stars: Starborn. The Empress changed too. Her armor grew lighter. Her counsel grew broader. She allowed voices long silenced to be heard again. Together they reformed the empire from within. Not quickly, not easily, but together. Then came the warning. From the outer rim. A signal. Faint, desperate. A new enemy. One not of empire, not of flesh, but of machines. The old war machines that had once destroyed 100 colonies, long thought dead, now rising again from cold space. The Empress looked to Mark. They will come for us, not to challenge our rule, but to erase our future. Mark stood on the deck of the rebuilt command ship, a human ship, merged with alien tech, powered by both sides. He turned to her. Then we give them a war they cannot forget. She smiled, not the smile of a ruler, but the smile of someone no longer alone. Together they launched from the surface, their fleet behind them, 1,000 worlds watching, not for survival, but for what came next. Across the stars the message spread. The Empress fights, the Starborn leads, the galaxy stands, and somewhere beyond the rim, the machines waited. But this time, humanity would not fall, and the Empress would not stand alone. For the first time in the Empire's long cruel history, the stars belonged not to conquerors, but to those who dared to change. The war began, not with silence, but with unity, and in that unity, hope was born.